Picture a morning in Africa, hundreds of thousands of years ago. You wake up, and getting dressed is the last thing on your mind. Now, cut to today: coffee, traffic, and an outfit you chose before you were even awake. Here is the strange part: you are the only large animal on Earth that chooses to wear something, and we even built laws around it. So, why did you start? Why us when nothing else bothered? Stick with me, because the oldest clue we have comes from a tiny creature you hate. Before we get to clothes, we have to answer a stranger question first. Why are you basically naked? Stop and think about it for a second. Almost every large animal on the planet is covered in fur. Gorillas, wolves, bears, horses, lions, elephants, all of them walking around in a full coat, in deserts, in snow, in jungles, and then there is you, standing in the middle of all that, smooth, a little patchy, weirdly pink in some spots, wearing an evolutionary look that basically says, I used to have fur, but I made some choices. So what happened? The most popular explanation is about staying cool. Somewhere along the way, your ancestors moved out of the shady forests and into the open grasslands, and they started walking and running long distances to hunt. If you are chasing an animal across an open plain under the sun, a thick coat of fur becomes a serious problem. You overheat, you slow down, your body temperature spikes, and you collapse before you ever catch the thing you were chasing. And in that world, coming home with nothing means you do not eat. So, over hundreds of thousands of years, you traded the fur for something better. You became one of the sweatiest creatures alive. Your skin holds somewhere between 2 and 4 million sweat glands, which is more than almost any other animal on Earth. You are, with no exaggeration, an elite cooling machine. If sweating were an Olympic sport, you would take home every single medal. And honestly, that trade was brilliant. It let your ancestors hunt in the heat of the day when most other predators had to lie down in the shade. And wait, it is the same system, keeping you comfortable right now. The reason you reach for the air conditioning the second summer hits. But here is the catch. A cooling system that good comes with a downside you already know too well. The moment the temperature drops, you are in trouble. A bare human in the cold does not last long. Strip away the fur, and you have built a body that is amazing at dumping heat and genuinely terrible at holding on to it. Which raises a pretty obvious question. If we were freezing, why did it take us so long to cover back up? Here is the answer almost everyone just assumes. We got cold. Humans walked out of Africa, hit colder country, wrapped themselves in animal skins, and never looked back. Simple, clean, the kind of story a kid could tell you. There is just one problem. The timeline refuses to cooperate. When scientists try to pin down when people first started wearing clothes, on a regular basis, the evidence points to somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. Sit with that for a second, because here is what makes it so strange. Modern humans did not leave Africa in any serious numbers until around 70,000 years ago. So do the math with me. Clothing shows up tens of thousands of years before anyone actually walked into a cold climate. That is an enormous gap, and it quietly breaks the whole tidy story. If you invent clothes long before you ever face real cold, then cold was not the thing that got you dressed in the first place. Which means something else was going on, something happening back home, in the warm heart of Africa, long before anyone started migrating. Something that had less to do with temperature and a lot more to do with each other. Something social, the kind of reason that says more about who you are than about how warm you happen to be. And the wildest part is how we figured this out. We did not crack it from a scrap of ancient fabric, because fabric rots, and almost nothing survives that long. We cracked it using a source nobody would ever expect, a living witness that has been riding along on human bodies this entire time. And yes, we are finally going to talk about the thing I promised you. We are going to talk about the lice. So let me ask you something before I give it away. If you had to guess, the oldest hard evidence we have for human clothing, what would you say? Cave paintings? A frozen scrap of hide? Drop your guess in the comments right now because there is almost no chance. You land on the real answer. It is lice. I know. Stay with me because this is genuinely one of the strangest pieces of detective work in all of science. A team of geneticists at the University of Florida decided to map the family tree of human lice. And to understand why that matters, you need one quick fact about the little parasites living on us. Humans carry two main kinds: head lice, which live up in your hair, and body lice, which live somewhere very specific, not on your skin, in your clothing, down in the seams, the folds, the fabric itself. Here is the part that changes everything. Body lice literally cannot survive without clothes. Bare skin will not keep them alive. They need fabric to hide in and to keep them warm. So, the exact moment body lice split off from head lice and became their own separate creature is basically the moment humans started wearing clothing, often enough to build a brand new home for a bug. So, the researchers ran the numbers, tracing that genetic split backward through time, and it landed somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago, which lines up with the window we just talked about, still long before anyone ever walked into the cold. In other words, a tiny bug caught the exact moment of the first outfit and quietly carried that date forward for us with no cave art and no ancient fabric required. Now really let that sink in. One of the most hated little creatures in human history. The thing that triggers panic in every elementary school and ruins summer camp accidentally became the record keeper of the very first outfit. The lice knew we got dressed before we did. They were there. They adapted. They moved in and never left, which is either kind of beautiful or deeply disgusting. And honestly, it is both at the exact same time. But knowing roughly when we got dressed only makes the bigger question louder. Because if it was not the cold that pushed us into clothing, then what on earth was it actually for? The first answer is a little boring. The second answer is all about you. So let us start with the boring answer, because it is real, and it does matter. Clothing protects you. Out on the open savanna, your bare skin was exposed to everything. Brutal sun that could burn you in a single afternoon. Thorns and sharp brush that tore at your legs, biting insects. Hunting for a meal. A simple animal hide slung over your shoulders solved a dozen problems at once. It was sunscreen, bug spray, and body armor, all rolled into one. But here is where it gets interesting, because protection alone does not explain everything we see. If clothing were only about survival, you would expect it to be plain, practical, purely functional. It was not. Almost from the very beginning, humans were decorating themselves. Think about ochre. This is a natural earth pigment, a rusty red powder, and our ancestors were collecting it and grinding it up. As far back as 200,000 years ago, you do not travel for miles to dig up red powder because it keeps you warm. You do it because you want to mark your skin, your body, with something that says, "Look at me." That is not survival. That is a statement. And that changes the whole picture. Picture a group gathered around the fire at night. One person is wearing the skin of a predator they took down. Another has painted bold red streaks across a cloak. Without a single word, everyone around that fire already knows something. Who is strong, who is brave, who belongs to which group. Clothing had quietly become the first way to broadcast who you are before you ever open your mouth. And you still do this every single day. Think about the outfit you pick for a job interview or the thing you agonize over before a first date. You are not choosing it to stay warm. You are choosing it to send a message. When you slip on a shirt with a leopard print, you are echoing an ancestor who wore the actual leopard skin to say the exact same thing. I am someone worth noticing. So clothing was never just a shield. It was a shield that could talk. But draping a loose hide over your shoulders is one thing. Actually shaping fabric, to fit a human body is a completely different level of genius. And for that, someone had to invent a tool so small you could hold it between two fingers. So picture the leap. For a long time, wearing clothes meant draping a hide over yourself and tying it off, hoping it stayed put. Useful, sure, but clumsy. It flapped. It slipped. Cold air poured in through every gap. And then, somewhere in the deep past, someone looked at a splinter of bone and had an idea that would echo across every closet on Earth. They ground that bone down, sharpened one end to a fine point, and carefully drilled a tiny hole through the other. They had just invented the eyed needle, and with it, everything changed. Because a needle lets you do something a draped hide never could. It lets you join separate pieces together, shape them, and build clothing that actually fits the body wearing it. One of the oldest needles we have was found in Denisova Cave, and it is around 50,000 years old. Sit with what that tiny tool really represents. This is not just survival gear anymore. This is engineering. Someone looked at the human body and thought about sleeves, seams, and snug edges that trap warmth instead of letting it leak away. That is design thinking, tens of thousands of years before the word design ever existed. And the difference is enormous. A loose hide is basically a prehistoric trash bag you throw over your shoulders. A tailored garment is a second skin, cut and stitched to move with you, to seal out the wind, to keep every bit of your hard-earned heat right where you need it. It is the exact same principle, stitched into every jacket, every hoodie, and every pair of jeans. Hanging in your closet right now, a straight line running from a sliver of bone to the seams you are wearing today. That single invention turned clothing from a rough shield into precision equipment. And precision equipment is exactly what you need to survive somewhere truly brutal. Which brings us to a twist most people never see coming. Because it turns out, our species was not the only kind of human quietly figuring this out. For a long time, we liked to imagine ourselves as the special ones, the clever species, the only humans who ever wrapped up against the world. But the ground keeps telling a different story. Because out there, we were never really alone. Meet the Neanderthals. For years, popular culture painted them as dumb, hunched brutes. That picture is dead wrong. Neanderthals lived through brutal Ice Age winters in Europe, and to survive that, they were working hides. Scientists have found bone tools called lissoirs made specifically for softening and smoothing animal skins into wearable leather. These were people preparing clothing with real skill tens of thousands of years ago. And they were not the only cousins doing it. Over in the caves of Siberia, the Denisovans, another human relative, left behind stunning objects, delicate stone bracelets, beads, ornaments, carefully drilled and polished, not just tools for staying warm, but things made to be worn and shown off. So sit with what that really means. 3 different kinds of humans, spread across 3 different regions, all arrived at the same idea, on their own. Cover the body, shape the material, and then, almost immediately, start decorating it. That is not a lucky accident. That happened once. That is a pattern which flips the whole question on its head. Maybe clothing was never just some quirky invention that our species stumbled into by chance. Maybe the moment any intelligent social creature loses its fur and starts living in groups, clothing becomes almost inevitable, a destination that very different minds keep walking toward. In a strange way, the urge that sent you reaching for something to wear this morning may be older and deeper than our species itself, wired into any mind smart enough to look at itself and care. But there is one thing your ancestors did that none of the others ever managed. They took this simple covering and turned it into something no animal had ever created before. They turned it into a voice. And that voice turned out to be the strangest thing of all, because plenty of animals stay warm and a few even decorate themselves. But no other creature on this planet ever turned what it wears into a language. Only humans did that. Think about what your clothing actually says before you say a single word. A judge puts on a robe, and the whole room goes quiet. A soldier wears a uniform, and you instantly know their rank, their side, their role. A bride wears white. A family wears black to a funeral. None of these choices are about temperature. They are messages worn on the body, understood by everyone in the room without a word of explanation. Our ancestors figured this out astonishingly early. The moment they started dyeing fabric, the game changed. A dyed cloth is not one bit warmer than an undyed one. Coloring it takes extra time, extra effort, extra resources, all for zero survival value. So why bother? Because a splash of color says something. It says, I have status. It says, I belong to this group and not that one. It says, I am a leader, a healer, someone you should listen to. Clothing had quietly become a way to carry your identity on the outside of your body. And you are fluent in this language, even if you have never once thought about it. Every single morning you get dressed, you are making a statement. The hoodie says relaxed. The suit says serious. The band shirt says, here is my tribe. You are broadcasting your mood, your job, your group, your whole story, and you are reading it off everyone around you. At the exact same time, instantly, automatically. Now zoom out and feel the full weight of it. This started with someone scraping a single animal hide clean beside a fire. It has grown into a global fashion industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars every year. That is the same impulse, the same silent voice, scaled up across the entire planet. But this voice was about to face its harshest test, because the world was about to get very, very cold, and clothing was about to stop being a choice. So the world got cold. Not a chilly week, not one rough winter, but a deep grinding cold that settled over the planet and refused to leave. Between about 120,000 and 70,000 years ago, the Earth swung into a brutal ice age. Glaciers crawled south, rain vanished, and vast stretches of land turned into freezing, wind-blasted desert. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Our species very nearly did not make it. When scientists study the DNA of everyone alive today, they find a strange, narrow bottleneck buried in our past. At one point, the entire human population may have crashed to as few as 10,000, to 30,000 people. Every single person on Earth right now traces back through that tiny, shivering group of survivors. So picture that world. Food is scarce, and a bare human body, that brilliant, cooling machine we built on the savanna, is now a death sentence. In that world, researchers think one thing, quietly drew the line between the living and the dead. Clothing. Not a loose hide, flapping in the wind, but real, knitted, sewn clothing. The kind that traps heat and seals out the cold. The kind that needle made possible. The groups who could tailor warm clothing had the best chance of surviving the winter. The ones who could not were far more likely never to wake up. So the skill got passed down, parent to child, because every generation that failed to learn it froze out of the story entirely. Clothing was no longer decoration or a message. It was the single most important piece of survival technology our species owned. And this is the payoff of that second skin. It did not just keep us alive. It set us free. Wrapped in clothing we made ourselves, humans walked straight into places that should have killed us. Frozen tundra, the very edge of the ice. That is a big part of the reason your species is standing on every continent on Earth today. We did not wait for a warmer body to evolve. We built one, and we wore it out the door. But the story does not end with a hide stitched around your shoulders, because somewhere along the way, We stopped skinning the world to cover ourselves, and we started building our clothing from almost nothing at all. Because here is where the whole story quietly explodes outward. At some point, our ancestors stopped depending on animal skins altogether and did something almost magical. They learned to take thin fibers from plants and twist them into thread. In a cave in the country of Georgia, researchers found flax fibers around 30,000 years old. Some of them died, some even twisted into cord. That is not a hide anymore. That is textile built from scratch. And once you can make thread, everything changes. By the Neolithic, humans were weaving flax into linen and spinning wool, cotton, and silk into fabric. Clothing was no longer something you had to hunt for. It was something you could grow, farm, and manufacture. And that single shift rippled out into everything. Think about it. Entire trade routes were carved across continents just to move fabric. Empires rose and fell on cotton and wool. Silk was so valuable that a single road was named after it, a road that stitched the east to the west and quietly redrew the political map of the world. What began as one person scraping a hide had become one of the largest forces in all of human history. And all of it lands right here, in your closet, on an ordinary morning. That shirt you pulled on, without a second thought, carries 100,000 years of survival, status, language, and reinvention. Which brings us all the way back to where we started and to one last question, worth asking. So, why did we start wearing clothes? Not for the cold. We did it to guard our skin, to survive, and above all, to tell each other who we are. The person crouched beside a fire 100,000 years ago, pulling a hide tighter, and you this morning, reaching for something to wear, are doing the exact same thing, choosing what to say to the world without a word. That is the second skin we have never taken off. Here is a question worth sitting with. If you could live completely bare, like your oldest ancestors, would you want to? Tell me honestly in the comments. And the next time you sigh that you have nothing to wear, remember, you are holding 100,000 years of human genius in your hands.